I'm JD Kelly. I've been working in voice acting for just over 10 years, doing things like, I've done games like Steel Division Normandy 44 and Alien Scumbags. Sorry, you've been in Alien Scumbags. I'm getting my mixed up. Spectacular Sparky. I've done indie games, I've done AAAs, and I've done other parts in the industry as well. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions. I'm here with Shaun, who has an awesome voice actor. I've been working most recently in Baldur's Gate 3, which some of you will know, but also things like No Rest for the Wicked as part of my Adventure Jam that was recently as well, and Clare, who has done things like Alien Scumbags, as I mentioned, and Spaceboat, but has also done things like community management as well, and working in the video game industry as well. So hopefully between us, we've got some knowledge so we can answer some questions for you. So if you have any questions, please put your hand up and put them down as people answer the questions so you're not holding it up throughout the whole thing. But we'll frequently ask for hands up and we'll be answering any questions. So does anybody have any questions for us that they'd like to ask? Straight up, yes. The enthusiasm, I love it.
Okay, so as a voiceover artist, what do you need from us for you to be able to deliver the content to us? I mean, what direction, what is it that you really wish you were given and you never get? What is it that we can give you to make it easier for you to deliver?
Do you want to start with this? I completely understand.
No, is it working? There you go. Okay, first things first, pronunciation guide. We get a script, and then there's words that we can't understand, and then we just pretend to make up the words and then give it back, and it'd be like, that's not the words. So we've done 20 takes, 2 hours, nothing. Pronunciation guide is fantastic. Also, a direction of how you're delivering the lines, because if it's a very serious line, and it's like they want it funny but not funny, and you do it with a laugh and stuff, and it's a very serious line, they'd be very unhappy. So that's great as well. I think that's about it really for me. There you go.
I would say either an animation of what the character's going to look like, or at least a physical description would be nice. I've had times when they've said, oh yeah, it's a young man, and so I've done it, and then it comes out as an old man with a goatee, so I'm like, okay. So some sort of description, and I think it's really good to have as much information about the world, because we're inhabiting the space as much as just the character. Where are they? They're in a crowded room. Are there spaceships flying overhead? Like all that kind of stuff is really helpful.
Yeah, world building is a huge part of this, to be able to give an accurate depiction of what that character is going through. It's like, what are their motivations? Like, what are they going through in their lives? What do they think of the person they're talking to? What do they want out of that discussion? It's the who, what, when, where, and why of that scenario, of each scene that we're reading for, so that we know whether tonally it's correct or incorrect of the way that we're delivering those lines. Physicality is a great form, because if you're thinking about something like an orc character, they may have tusks, and it might inform of how they speak with those tusks in a way, and all kinds of stuff like that. The different physicality of a character can change the way that you deliver those lines. Are they really big and barrel-chested, so they've got all of that grit and barrel to their voice? Or are they quite waif-like and things like, or are they waif-like but actually have a deep voice? So anything you can tell us about the character tells us the most about it, what they look like, what they act like, what culture that they come from. Are they warrior-like? Is aggression, is war part of their credo? So the more information we get, the better quality that we can give over. Communication, I think, not just from director to actor, or writer and director to actor, but also from actor to writer and director. It goes both ways. The more we communicate and the more we can discuss what's going on, the more accurately we can portray a character that's going to be right for the project. We do get sometimes scripts with no direction, or with nothing on there, and it's just good luck. And if communication is there, it means that we can say, okay, you haven't given me this, what is that? If there is no communication, then it's very difficult to kind of broach that conversation from scratch. So yeah, just communicate both ways, the who, what, where, and why, and physicality. I think that kind of covers it.
I think also a lot of the time when we come in to re-record, or if we're doing pickups and stuff, a lot of the time it's like we go in with this scene we've done months ago, and it's one line, and it's like, oh, well, the person's died, and like, it's like, so we've got as much context as possible. I've been working on this beautiful visual novel for the last number of months, and the developer sent me a compendium of, and it was so helpful. She sent me like the color scheme and how that reflects the character, and all the stuff is like, it may not be helpful to me, but it's also nice to get an insight into what, if you have been developing this game for, however many months or years, it's nice to get like a flavor for what you're wanting.
Great question. Really awesome question. Anybody else? Hands up, questions, please. From Rebellion. There's a question over there. Do we have a microphone? Am I coming out? Oh, yeah, I'm coming out. On the ball.
He's running.
Please, ask a question.
Yeah, so how much like autonomy do you get in terms of like how you perform? Like, has there been any case where, for example, like you disagree with some direction they give you, and like how do those conversations go, and how do you like balance the interests of like yourself and the rest of the team?
Sorry, JD.
No, you're all right.
Really smashed that doing it in front of my employer, didn't I?
Good question. Autonomy. How much do we get? How much do we get to choose what the characters are doing, or how we portray those characters? For me, I think from job to job, it can vary wildly. Sometimes people are like, the script must be done exactly as it's written on the script, and we want this particular character. Some jobs will say, okay, you can ad-lib with the script. Some jobs will be very much like, oh, what do you think would fit here? Just give us an improv of something, and it's really loosey-goosey. Sometimes you'll be able to do things like, the words have to be correct, but your vocalisms, like in between, like it's, rather than it being like, how you doing today, Dave? It might be, how are you doing today, Dave? And it completely changes how that character comes across. And so some directors are more, or writers are more willing to be flexible on that kind of stuff, and some of them aren't. And in terms of choosing the voice of the character, sometimes you workshop it in the time, in the booth, and it's just like, oh, I was thinking gravelly for this person, or maybe slightly like a bit of a lower class London accent because they're a bit more gruff and rough and tumble. And sometimes they'll go, oh, that's awesome. And sometimes they'll go, actually, that's not what we had in mind. This character, yes, they come from a rough background, but they're pretending to be upper class and putting across that facade. Unless we get told that, we may come up with preconceptions. So I think part of being a good actor is also being flexible and agile, so that when you get direction in the booth you weren't expecting, you haven't come up with a preconceived idea of what the character should be, just an option for what it should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And in some situations, they don't give you anything at all, and you have to write the character. So they're like, we're thinking of female, and that's all they give you. Okay, so you'll get some of those situations, and it's also with time frame as well. So I've had situations when they'll be like, we need this voiceover in 2 hours, and we need the character written. So you have lots of different situations that you will encounter. They're all very different, and clients are very different as well. You never get exactly the same. So yeah.
I definitely think it's about time frame. Like if someone's gonna be pushed on a deadline, they might just be like, I just need it done. Can you just fit the kind of cookie cutter mold? I've got this shape already. Can you just fill it? A lot of the time, but then the other time it might be if it's a small character and they don't really know what they want, because it's just like, oh well, it's a couple lines here, and it's this kind of. I did a rat in Baldur's Gate who is a merchant. He's a rat merchant, and called Skittle, and he and it's like. It's in the kind of crunch time, right? We got to get it going, and so they don't have the time to really think about it. Whereas my brain's like, it could be this, it could be that. So I could be creative in creating a lot, in making what I had in my head, but at some point also you've just got to make a decision and run with it, because they're going to be like, well, is it, we trust you, so yeah.
More questions, please. Great question. Really enjoyed that one. One at the back there.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
where you can find jobs like what you do, and if you want to do it in a different language like French or Italian or Spanish, how you can do that.
So where do you get jobs from generally, and then also if you want to do it in different languages, where do you find those as well? So for different languages, localization is a huge field of voice acting, which is taking a game that is not always, but sometimes in English, and creating a local version of it in the local language in French, Italian, and things like that. So you'd be looking at localization companies that do that. Often there are overarching companies that will actually specialize in converting a game's existing audio to be localized to certain places. So if you look at game localization, you can usually find up a bunch of audio companies that'll do that. And specifically, casting happens in that way as well. If you're a voice actor who has specializations in multiple different languages, also listing that is helpful because sometimes they'll get you to do the dialogue for that character in both languages to be able to have the original voice actor as the localization for that character. Sometimes it's done in-house by certain gaming companies where sometimes you've got things like Ubisoft has Montreal as well as various other places across the world, and obviously sometimes they'll take care of their own localization, but often they'll use things like translation companies, localization companies, in that kind of way. In terms of accented English, there are roles out there. Obviously it is difficult because it only suits certain characters, and there's usually a reason why they have accented English, but there is work out there for sure. And then there's obviously also the option of training out an accent in order to be able to do English accents, American accents for more westernized accents in that kind of way. But you'll also find a lot of accents like myself also like training in Eastern European accents and Russian accents and accents from around the world in order to diversify the roles that we can apply for. But there's also a focus at the moment for authenticity and for native accents. So the majority of the work you tend to get is in your own voice, in your own native accent, although that can vary. Some actors do specialize in that way. Anything else on that?
I think it's worth not underestimating the power of social media as well, because on X, Twitter, they have a lot of profiles that will retweet casting calls. So, and a lot of the time it's for roles that aren't fitting the kind of me kind of thing, you know. So if they're looking for someone with a different accent or who speaks a different language, usually that is going to find its way on social media at some point. So it's just keeping your eye to the screen, and yeah, it will pop up at some point.
You'll also see a lot of castings for other languages on sites like Mandy.com, StarNow.com,
Casting Call Club.
Backstage as well. They sometimes do different language castings or accented castings as well. You can set up on a lot of these casting sites filters for specific languages that are being spoken as well. So that means when you're doing search terms or checking like what jobs are available that have been posted today or this week or this month, depending on how often you check it, you can actually set up its search terms so that you get those specific jobs. So if you're Spanish speaking, you can just get the Spanish jobs or whatever languages you do speak. And if you're looking for specific accents, you can sometimes filter by that as well, which is helpful.
Talent pools as well. Like you can get onto talent pools and they will ask you what languages you speak. So if you say you speak these certain languages, then they will reach out to you when they have stuff. Other than that, being somewhere like here, speaking to developers and saying, look, I'm a voice artist and I speak in this language. Like it's good just to have conversations with people here. Yeah.
Different languages are also really good for commercial and corporate work as well for voice acting, not just video games, because that expands you out into a world of, again, localization for things like advertisements, for commercials, for business-to-business demonstration videos, and especially when they're working with foreign clients and things like that as well. So you can contact businesses directly. You can look through talent sites for stuff like that as well. That's quite useful.
And as I said, if you come to these events and stuff, always bring business cards. Even if you're worried about it and stuff, it's always great to hand them out when you're talking to developers or studios. And the other way I go is I always will message people, like developers, on Twitter and be like, hi, I know you might not have any casting calls, but I'm a voice actor and I'd love to know if there's any projects that are coming out that I could audition for. And a lot of the times it's no, but other times I've got quite a few roles from there. So it helps just to reach out.
Awesome question. Thank you so much. Any more questions? Please put your hand up if you have a question for us. There's one just there.
So you saying, oh, it's really weird hearing my own voice back.
Just angle it upwards a little bit and it'll turn away from the speakers.
You saying obviously about reaching out and saying you're a voice actor, like have you got anything? What do you do if you're just starting, so you haven't worked on anything previously and you don't feel comfortable kind of saying, I am a voice actor, because you can't like say, I have done previous things?
So I think game jams are a really good asset for aspiring or budding artists. Actually, I'm going to veto that. Don't call yourself an aspiring voice artist. You are a voice artist. Yeah, you are. Like you need to own your craft. If that is what you are, that's who you are. So there are meetup game jams. There are online game jams as well, where developers will create something in 48 hours, in 2 weeks, and a lot of them will need voice artists to join. So if you've got Discord, if you've got X, Twitter, you can join onto these groups. Like Adventure X was in March. We did one.
Yeah, we did one recently. It was Adventure Jam, and that was awesome. It was really fun.
Fab. And like, also, I just want to say it now. So years ago, before the pandemic, I came to a panel on how to get started in voice acting that was hosted by JD Kelly. Watched it and was like, great, I'm going to take all of that. I'm going to leech, let's go. And then I reached out and so being here is also a good place to start. The other thing is if I know someone and I'm like, I will recommend or I will tag them in something, or so also just building your network is worth it. But yeah, game jams is my answer. It's also you build then visual footage that you can send to people as well, and you say, I've done these things, and then as far as someone is concerned, that's credible work.
You'll also find things like Casting Call Club. It's castingcall.club, which is a voice acting talent site. It's free to be on there. There's a lot of things like fan dubs and sort of like a bridge series and people's like Minecraft worlds where they want voices and stuff like that. So there's some fun stuff on there, and it's usually either unpaid or very low paid. But there is the occasional things like indie games go on there sometimes. You get audiobooks on there, and some audio dramas go on there as well. And it's nice because you can hear what other people are doing. So because it doesn't have to be an open. Your audition doesn't have to be listened to by everybody, but it is by default. So you can listen to what other people have done for those auditions, which is really fun. So sites like that also give you some like early jobs to kind of cut your teeth on and try out. You can create samples of stuff that you've done by like finding out of copyright material or having people write stuff that you can create a sample of your voice to kind of show off what you can do. So not as like a big show reel and things like that, or something that you're cold calling or cold emailing to do so, but just something that shows off what you can do and putting that out into the world, which is a great way to kind of get started with bits like that as well. As Shaun said, obviously, by coming here, you're already putting stuff into yourself to become an actor. There's plenty of people sat at home going, oh yeah, I could do that. Or, oh yeah, or maybe I'll try that one day, but they haven't. You, all of you, are here today, and if you're interested in becoming a voice actor, and then you are a voice actor. You're on that journey. It's literally a journey, and the journey never stops. There isn't like a destination where I'm a good actor now and I'm done. You know, I still take classes myself. I still see coaches myself. I continuously work. I know these two do as well. We're always trying to improve, and it's just one big, long journey, and it's a wild ride. So by being here and doing that, you're already doing the work. Just keep putting yourself out there, keep practicing, keep putting yourself into it, and you'll do great.
And imposter syndrome is real. Even though we're on a stage right now, we don't think we're voice actors. at all. Like, I've done it for 6 years. How many years have you done it for?
I've done this for over 10
I don't
years,
think
and
I'm a-
sometimes I'm like, do I belong here?
Yeah, exactly. We'd come to this like,
Yes, we
before we
do.
came up on stage, we're like, but are we voice actors though? Can we pretend we're voice actors and stuff? So it's always there. And also, if you'd like to start doing your own demo reel as well, there's loads of samples online you can find for adverts you can start reading, and then you can actually put together your own demo reel and keep practicing, and then start handing that out as an audition and so forth.
I would say it's something to be careful of. Doing a demo to start with can be done too early, and you got to make sure that you do some learning, do some education on being an actor, creating voices, creating characters. But when you are ready, there is some stigma about creating their own demo. But if you can create one of good quality, it isn't a bad thing to do. I think you can create your own demo, but you need to make sure you've got the knowledge to make sure you're going to mix and master it properly, and that the audio is going to come across at good quality, or hire someone who can do that for you. So yes, you can create your own demo and do that, and that's a great thing to do, but make sure you do it when you're ready for it. And if you're not sure, but you think maybe, then it doesn't hurt to book 15 minutes, 30 minutes with a coach, with a professional who can give you that outside permission and make you go, okay, yes, I am ready, and give you that confidence, and then the delivery you'll give will be with confidence and not with second-guessing yourself.
Also, it's getting used to the sound of your own voice is still tricky. But actually, I spent the first 6 months, maybe more than that. I got a cheap mic. I would record stuff. I would record, and then I'd listen back to it, and I would just get used to my voice, explore what I thought I could do with it, see, oh, I quite like this accent. I'm going to try and research that accent a bit more. I'm going to kind of watch people online, and I'm going to listen to people. And there's really good free accent resources online, like the IDEA, which is the International Dialects of English Archive or something. So that things like that is like, learning. So I just got used to what?
I would not have remembered that acronym. Well done.
I use that a lot. Just getting used to the sound of your own voice, I then started to then explore like, oh, actually, I'm experimenting with like volume, and I'm going to try and put this in. And I actually ended up making my first demo reel out of 6 months of just craft and trying stuff. And then I was able to go, oh, look, so-and-so, I've listened to this. Can you have a listen and tell me what you think? And that starts conversations, and that's actually how I got Baldur's Gate. So it's you just go, try this, how's this,
The more you practice, it breeds awareness. Awareness breeds control, and then control means you can create characters more effectively. So it's a real nice progress to go through in that way.
And also audio box, practice those, the screaming and the shouting, because that's really difficult to learn.
Awesome question. Thank you so much. That's really cool. Next question. There's a person over there.
Hi there. Larry, nice to meet you. You mentioned that voice acting is typically more of a professional kind of work that requires training, coaching, and mentoring to really perfect your natural role as a voice actor. What about for people who are essentially just self-taught, have no prior training, no prior knowledge of how voice acting works, and they just pretty much improve their voice by just reading SpongeBob SquarePants transcripts in their bedroom?
So I am legit obsessed with SpongeBob, first of all. So I also relate. I think being self-taught self-taught still means you can listen to people online. If you're gaming, like, listen to what that person is saying and how they're saying it, and whether you feel it fits within that world. Like, do you believe what they're saying? Do you all that kind of stuff? It's like imitation is a good way to start, and then having a look. You could look at online tutoring. You could look at online resources. Gravy for the Brain is a good voiceover coaching website. If you are able to save a little bit and invest in that, that's a good place as well. But being self-taught or having been to a fancy drama school, either way, you get the work yourself. It's not your training. So you need to just invest in your craft a bit.
Yeah, I'd say if you start from a background of self-taught, that's not a bad thing. It can certainly get you jobs. It can get you money through the door in order to then make further improvements. I think self-taught can reach a ceiling of the kinds of jobs that you can get to. And until you start getting outside training, either through a coach, through classes, or through more traditional education, there's definitely multiple ways of doing it. There is nothing wrong with being coached by someone online, as long as you're doing it through somebody who's reputable and a good site, Gravy for the Brain. I use Skills Hub as well, which is really good, which is Jennifer Hale's platform for coaching and stuff. Either one-to-one or through classes, just people who are going to put you through your paces. The problem with doing it all yourself is you're not just being an actor, you're also being a self-director. You're also being a research assistant or a script analysis as well. And that's splitting your head in multiple ways, and it can make it very easy to second-guess yourself. Whereas if you have someone to direct you, like a coach or a teacher, or even like peers in a workshop and things like that as well in order to increase your skills, it means you can get rid of those parts and just be the role, be the actor, be the character, and you can get more nuanced performances and in-depth performances in that way. So self-taught is great, and it's not a bad place to come from. You can come into this industry from many different directions, but I think there's a ceiling to it, and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, I've earned a bit of money doing small roles here, some indie games, and doing really well. Maybe I take that money and put it into coaching, into classes, into teaching, and you will find that your acting ability goes up the more you do things like that. So I do see certainly value in furthering your education with it to bolster what you've already learned through self-taught.
It's all about endurance, basically, as well. Just keep going and stuff. If you're self-taught, just keep pushing yourself.
Great question. Awesome. Thank you so much. Anybody else? A question from the audience? Say, put your hand up if you have a question for us. If you're not ready. Oh, yes, question here.
Hey. Oh, too close. Do you have any tips or requests for people who are directing you, who may or may not have training in acting and drama? If you could give one request to your next voice director, what would it be?
One bit of advice. Do you guys want to start with this one? Or? Okay. Well, the biggest thing I would always say is practice. Practice is everything. Shaun mentioned earlier about getting used to the sound of your own voice. We hear our voice through the resonance of our own skull, through our own jaw. We hear the sound reflected from the walls back to us, so it sounds a certain way. When you hear it from a single source, from a speaker or headphones, like the casting director or the people you're auditioning for will, then it's from a completely different source. It sounds very different. So that's alien to us at the beginning, which is why most people, when they start, I go, my voice sounds weird. Why does it sound like that? Our brains are wonderful things, though, and they change over time, and they adapt to certain situations. So the more that you listen to yourself coming from that speaker or those headphones, the more your brain works out, that's what I sound like. And the more that you do it, you eventually marry the two, so there's a voice that comes out of your mouth and the voice that comes out of the speaker sound like exactly the same thing. And that level of awareness, again, awareness breeds control. Control means you're doing better as an actor there as well. It means that you know what the client is going to hear in the booth whilst you're doing the acting, not after the fact listening to it, but when you're actually doing the acting, you know that the voice you're creating is exactly what the casting director, what the writer, what everybody involved in the project is going to hear, and ultimately the end user, the gamer. So practice really, really helps in terms of listening to yourself and getting better as an actor, developing those skills. Practice, practice, practice is something I drum into everyone. That's my big one.
Don't be disheartened by not getting auditions and stuff. Just keep going, even though it's like, you're like, I think I've got this role. This was amazing. I think I've got it. And then you don't get it. And then it's like, oh, I'm never going to do this again. So it's kind of the idea. You will go through loads and loads of auditions. But if you carry on, every chance you're putting out there to take, like, there's an opportunity, you might get the role. So that's my advice for everyone.
Yeah, self-care, looking after yourself, like congratulating yourself on, like, no win is small. If you have sent in an audition, that is a win. You've recorded something, you've invested in a character, you've explored something, like that in itself is a great achievement. The reality of it is the only thing you can control is your performance. You cannot control what they are looking for. if you send it in and they decide not to go your way, that does not mean that you did a bad job. You could have had a phenomenal audition, but it was just that they were looking for something slightly different. That's all. My one piece of advice, I think, would be the marrying instinct and prep. So going with your gut instinct, but the instinct coming from just reading the script and investing in, like, you know, what are they trying to say? What do they want? What is getting in their way? What are they going to do about it? Like, all that kind of, you know, that stuff.
Next question, please. Thank you so much. Any hands for questions? Because if you don't start asking questions, I'm going to start asking questions.
Cool.
There's one there.
Thank heaven.
It's a big threat.
Hi, guys. So can you give us an example of a performance that really stood out to you and why it stood out to you? Was there something about the emotion in that performance? Was there something about how that actor really brought that character to life? Recently or in the past, like an example of something that really stood out to you?
Performance that stood out to me. Do you have one ready to, like, locked and loaded? I mean, I'm going to go with a slightly cop-out answer here. This is, I mean, it's kind of too obvious, but Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us. Sorry, I've stolen your answer. I'm so sorry. But the emotions they put forward in some of those scenes were so heavy, and they're really iconic performances. The way that they play with emotion and dialogue and really immerse you in those moments and those scenes are so intense. I mean, the situation they're in is very intense. If you've not seen the game, it's quite intense in that way. But they also managed to carry the moments of levity as well. So the variation in their performance kind of brings you out of it. You've got, the game's old, I can spoiler, it's fine. There's a moment in the car when they're looking over a magazine and joking together and having that moment of levity, even though the scenario that they're in, the gravitas of that moment, is still really heavy, but they're still having a moment of levity because you do in life. Like, real life is just funny sometimes. It just happens that way. And they play with each other. They play off of each other. And it's an interesting dynamic. But then you've got the really much more high-key moments. Like there's a moment after Ellie's run off slightly, after she feels let down by Joel, and they have a face-off in a house together where he's kind of trying to distance himself from her, and she opens up and has that moment of everyone has left me, fucking except for you, and pushes him, and it's that you could read that line of dialogue, everyone has left me, fucking except for you, and make it much more dejected, but instead it was physical. And there's a great making of where they talk about things like that. He didn't expect her to push him. She just did it as, like you say, as instinct. And it's those kind of like instincts and those movements and those little vocalizations like sighs and tutting or kissing the teeth, the tutting someone and things like that. All those little different things which add to a performance. It's not on the page. It may be not even what we've been directed to do. But if it's something that happens because you're feeling that moment, you're feeling that character, it can completely change and make that so much more vivid and real and authentic, because it's about kind of looking what human beings are like, how they act in those situations, ruminating that over in your head, not just from I felt that, but from I've analyzed that. I can see what that is and how human that is. And although sometimes sad or scary or brutal, there's still beauty in that. There's beauty in humanity and in how, like, as instincts, as human beings, which is what makes us explorers and adventurers and inventors, is however much we have the why in our heads, there's also the why not, and vice versa. Like, as creatures, we're designed to be inquisitive, to experiment. It's part of the reason why we developed using tools and things like that. The psychology of the mind is such a fascinating thing. And I feel like the more you look into that, the more you can find those nuances in those performances that really make you feel something, that make the hairs on your arms stand up and make you go, that was a moment in time. And that sticks in your mind. And for me, their performances really stick in my mind. There's a one night, sorry, I know I'm dominating this. There's a one night live of The Last of Us, and they do there's the music from the games played live. It's on YouTube, it's free to watch, but they also act out some of the scenes, not in mocap, not digitally, but just the two actors on stage. Obviously, they don't look like the characters they're portraying, but it's kind of, with all of that stripped away, the performances still hit in that amazing way. So it's interesting to watch things like that to get a different perspective on it and see acting rather than the end result, to see that making of, and it helps you connect some of those dots. It's in the same way, I'm very fussy about musicals, but my favorite one is Sweeney Todd. And there's a great performance of it where there are no props, there is no set dressing, they are all wearing all black and nothing else. So it's purely on the strength of their acting and their singing. And to me, it's a far better performance than like the Tim Burton film or whatever, where there's all set dressing, all props and all of that. To me, with all of that stripped away, if it still hits, that's something that really captivates. And that's, as a craft of acting, as an actor, that to me is like the stuff that I seek out. Sorry, very long answer.
Booker DeWitt, Bioshock Infinite. So basically going through struggle, and you wake up with confusion, and then the way he portrays that so much, and then as he's going through the game more and more, and the realization, and then there's that moment when you're like, oh, I'm the bad guy. So it's done so well, and you really grow attached to him. So he does such well doing the performance that you actually care for him so much, and then you don't actually want that outcome. And then you're like, no, that can't be the outcome and stuff. You want to go back and change it. So it's the ability for a voice actor to really engage you to the point that you don't want them to be a bad person, or you want them to be, you're emotionally attached to them. That's my one.
Mine was The Last of Us, so I've been trying to think. You know what? It surprised me, but the newer God of War was such a gut punch with like Kratos' journey and his kind of resistance and connection to fatherhood, and it was kind of like him almost re-looking at what it means to be a man, and like his journey was so beautiful. And I think because it wasn't really said at any point, it was implied. I think that was, for me, is the thing that hits, because I was a ballet dancer before I went into acting. So the physicality for me is always the thing that hits. And even if you can't see the character moving, you can hear in the actor that they're breathless or that they're moving. You can really hear it. And I think that and the Last of Us and like things like that, I think you can, motion capture aside, you can hear the physicality in their voice, and you can hear the gut instincts kind of taking over. It's just gorgeous.
It's a really interesting point, because I also think about things like the beauty of like mocap, PCAP, motion capture, performance capture in video games is now we're seeing a lot of those physical like acting moments that bring those performances out sometimes. The God of War is great because there's that, even in the opening scene, they're not very verbal. There's not a lot of lines of dialogue, but when they do speak, it means so much because there's those moments of levity. There's a thing called letting the script breathe, which is like, if you just read dialogue and read dialogue and read dialogue, it doesn't give that characterization. We don't speak at one speed or in one tone and stuff. We play with, when we speak to people, we have moments where you can hear someone thinking. And if you take those moments when you're reading the script and performing to think like the character would and have those moments of thought or stumbling over your words and things like that, or just saying one word sometimes because that's the only word you could say in that moment, it carries weight. And there's a great example of a performance, and it is absolutely gut-wrenching. And with Booker as well, and is it Elizabeth, the character with them? Yeah, the two of them, again, another different interplay between characters. You've got father and son in God of War, and Joel and Ellie who are estranged, and then Booker and Elizabeth, whose relationship goes through a wild roller coaster. yeah, it's all like, it conjures emotions, it conjures feelings, and I think that's so awesome, so valuable. Great answers, both of you. That was really cool. Do we have another question? Over here. Where's Will? I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you. Oh, sorry.
He's too busy chatting. When you're doing roles, how much do you become emotionally invested in them versus maintain a level of detachment to kind of protect yourself?
I go all in for the role. All the time, I always just go in. So I've done ones where you end up crying as well because you're studying it and you read the pages, but then you have to kind of, I always feel like it's better to just become the character. So it can be exhausting sometimes, well, if it's like a really sad story, like, does it get happy? No. So I go full in and I don't detach.
It's the discipline of it. Like sometimes, if it's like we need one line and it's you're bawling your eyes out, and then we're going to do the next pickup where they're really happy and asking what's for dinner, and then the next one we're crying again and it's really sad. Like I do invest as much as I can, but I also need the discipline to bounce, and also be able to give a performance that I can maybe replicate or try something different, or it depends on what it is. Like if it's a scene where we can do it continuously, I'll you just get carried away and it's what your gut is telling you. But yeah, I think it's a marrying of the two, because I think if I bring as much as I can of myself, but also I want it to be safe. So I would much rather invest in the character's trauma than my own. I'd rather invest in their world, and then I can come away from it and acknowledge it. And I usually, after every recording session, I journal and I write all of my thoughts. So I get all the characters' thoughts out onto the page, so that I can kind of return to myself, but also then afterwards on the next session, if I'm like, well, how do I get back to where I just was? Like, that was great. I can then read and journal again and find myself back into it.
I think it's a really difficult part of the craft, and something that is hard to learn and teach. I think I've always been taught that there's a best practice of your life experiences gives you knowledge of how certain things feel. And I always advise, if you want to be in acting, you also need to be living, have hobbies, have interests, have a life, because then you have things to draw from. And the idea is that whatever you've been through, you can draw from those things, but not take all of it with it, because you can put yourself emotionally and mental health-wise at risk when you're doing things like that. Best practice is to take the bits that are useful for creating that character, empathizing with that character and creating that role, and like you say, leaving it behind. But best practice isn't always reality, and sometimes you do get taken in with it. And so things like self-care is part of that as an actor. If you're creating emotional vulnerability for a character, and a character that has been through a lot of difficult things, sometimes journaling is awesome. I wish I'd done more of that. But sometimes self-care will look like a long bath. Sometimes it'll look like taking a break, doing some escapism, either going out in nature or watching some films or playing some games. But it's whatever it looks like for you, and it depends on how easy you find to pick up and put down those emotions. Sometimes there'll be roles that you want to play that have been through similar traumas to you, whether that be, I mean, not to get into any specifics, but things like grief, for example, is something a lot of people have gone through. Different people experience grief in different ways, and sometimes it will be tying into your own personal grief, and that's difficult. And you need to be able to, like you say, empathize with the character and put yourself in their shoes, but don't bring all of you with that. Because if you do that too much, then you could just be rehashing your own grief, and not in a healthy way. Sometimes you'll need to be experiencing grief with another character in a very different way than you experience grief as well. And that can also be dissonant and difficult, and also create a lot of difficulties with frustration. And if you let that affect you too much, then that'll come out in your performance. And that can also sometimes give you the wrong tonal quality for that character. all of these things are very difficult to deal with. I'm very much an advocate for, I think therapy is a wonderful thing. I think in America, therapy is a much more spoken about out loud and commonly sort of eschewed thing of like, oh yeah, I'm in therapy. What's your therapist like? And things like America in that way is really cool. I think we should talk about mental health more openly if we're comfortable doing so, and publicize the fact that mental health is something that affects all of us, not just in this industry, but in every industry, in every walk of life. And if you're doing things like emotional work, I do care work, for example. I know some other people who do care work, and that takes an emotional toll. And so I think we need to be open about the fact that requires care for it. If you were working with your hands all the time, you wouldn't not see a doctor if your hands were hurting. You'd be like, well, this could affect my livelihood. And I think it's the same thing with your emotions. If your emotions are being put at risk, then you should be taking care of those emotions and having help and support, whether that be through a good friendship network, a good peer network of other actors who can help you with that, or with things like a therapist or training in that kind of way. And there's things like CBT, which some people get along with. Like, there's a variety of different things to look like there. But the more that you live and the more that you experience, the more you have to draw from. And in the best practice, that's a very, very useful thing, but something certainly to be careful about and mindful of when you're acting.
It's also the character's experience. Like, I'm not a serial killer, but if I'm playing a serial killer, I can't invest in their real life because well, I could, but I'm not. So it's all relative. I've had characters where earlier this year there was a character who had a panic attack in one of the scenes, and so for me it's like, well, I'm not going to give myself a panic attack, but I'm going to find a safe way of replicating something that's believable that I can emotionally invest in, but is going to be safe for me. So it's definitely. Yeah, marrying discipline, isn't it?
Things like a panic attack, you'll know certain things, like you'll know how that breathing pattern feels like, that upper chest sort of like rapid breathing is there, and things like you'll know that the heart starts racing. You might not be able to get your words out in straight ways. Pulling on that knowledge, I think, is the useful stuff. But then if you're putting yourself at risk, then is that worth it for that job? And I think that's true with a lot of things. If you're a hardware site worker, you're going to wear a hard hat. You're going to look after yourself. And I think our hard hats look a little bit different, but they're still there in terms of looking after and advocating for ourselves. That's important. Great question.
I think we've gone about 2 minutes over, so we better wrap it there, unfortunately.
That's great. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along, for answering questions. Really appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of EGX as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Sorry for my less than perfect mic duty. Trying to manage the portfolio queue and this. You know when in EastEnders when someone goes on 2 dates at the same time?
You are absolutely fine. Can we grab a photo with you all before you run off and things like that? Would you mind if we do that? Yeah, we'll stand here and turn around and take a selfie with all of you in the background. It'd just be lovely to see all of your smiling faces, and we'll put it up on some social medias and stuff like that as well.
And just love that bit where coming to a panel and then you're doing something in Baldur's Gate a few years later. That is perfect. Listen to these people. Look what can happen.